Interestingly enough, the gut is such a powerful and evolving topic that I have done other gut presentations before. I always strive to make it a little different, bring in the latest and greatest, and this will be different again with more information. But, I've now been in practice. This is my 31st year. I have basically treated all ends of the spectrum, world champion athletes and people that had been sent home to die. Very fortunately, many of those patients that were sent home to die are alive and thriving today. They got their health back. And I have taught doctors, on 6 different continents, over 10,000 hours of seminars. And so, lots of people send in questions, and I love questions. We'll have questions and answers at the end. But, the questions that were asked is, why is the gut important? What are signs and symptoms that it's not working well? What about those bacteria in our gut? And by the way, we have more bacteria in our gut than we have cells in our body. What about probiotics and prebiotics, and what foods are good for the gut and not good for the gut? And then what about mental health and the gut-brain connection? And that is an ever-evolving circumstance. And then, my favorite superfood, Ganoderma lucidum, also known as reishi. How good is that for the gut bacteria, gut health, and really overall body health? And then what about coffee for people that have problems in their gut? So let's turn our clock back a couple thousand years ago. And Hippocrates, who's considered the father of modern medicine. And remember, doctors take their Hippocratic oath, which, by the way, the very first line or statement in that, or fact in that, is first do no harm. That's the first premise. So doctors should never do any harm. And so if you have a doctor that follows that, good for you. If you don't, look for a new one. But here's what Hippocrates said: all disease begins in the gut. Now, that was a pretty bold statement. And you know what? He wasn't accurate on that one. But emerging evidence is that so much of it does. And in fact, 90%, I'll show the reference soon. But when you start looking at this, things with the brain can start in the gut, things in the skin, things with the thyroid, things with the liver, overall health, especially energy and body composition. The heart and metabolism, even the immune system. About 80% of the immune system is clustered around the gut. So is the gut important? And absolutely it is. And when you take a look at this reference, the Open Microbiology Journal, here's what they said: 90% of diseases, 90% can be traced back to the gut and to the microbiome. So this may be our most significant area of attention and intervention to establish normal health. So when people start talking about signs and symptoms of the gut, we really shouldn't even be aware of our gut. So I have a question for you. If you're watching, if you're standing, if you're sitting, if you're walking, however you're doing this, are you aware of your gut? And for the most part, you shouldn't be. So, I used to tell people, you know what, your gut should talk to you when you need to use the restroom, or when you're hungry. So either I want to eat or I've got to poop. But we're beginning to realize now that appetite is really a lot more of a brain issue than it is a gut issue. And in fact, when people are making bad food choices, often they're trying to self-medicate their brain. And so we'll share some of that data as well. But what has to do with overall satiety or satisfaction from a meal? Quality, I'm glad they listed that first. Quantity, that matters as well. Nutrient status, and then even energy balance, especially how the body uses energy. All of that is really important. And how about this graphic here? It talks about something called hedonic stimulation. Now, notice what they're talking about there. By the way, what does hedonic mean? It means you're just going for pleasure and really not paying much attention to anything else. Just give me the pleasure. Notice visuals. So if something's visually appealing, so what do these food people do? They put things in very bright colors. Smell. If you've ever been to a mall, and Cinnabon will, they'll put fans and who knows, maybe even cinnamon oil to blow it through the mall. And you get hit with cinnamon, you go, oh my gosh, I want some of that. And then certainly taste and mouthfeel and all those things are very, very important. But ultimately, we don't want to give into that hedonic drive because there's something called hedonic adaptation. And quite simply, when you desire something, You strive for it, you obtain it, you enjoy it, and then you adapt to it and you desire more. And this is one of the things that they've especially found out with bad food, and especially processed food and sugar. And ultimately, initially you eat a little and you feel pretty good about that, but you want more. And the more you eat it, the more it takes to make you satisfied. And you can literally become addicted to these foods. When we start looking at the microbiome, over 122,000 published medical studies, for a long, long time. And the first two that were highlighted, the gastrointestinal microbiome review, good. Take a look at what it says. It's a diverse consortium of bacteria. I don't even know what archaea is. I need to look that up. Fungi, protozoa, and viruses that inhabit, notice, the gut of all mammals. But then look at the second one, the human microbiome and cancer. And here's what they're beginning to show. If you have a healthy microbiome, you're probably going to live a long time. If you don't have a healthy microbiome, you're going to be miserable and die early. And I'll share some of the data on that as well. But when you start looking at our bodies, we're literally loaded with bacteria, and it has functions and really microorganisms, not just bacteria. So we've got the nose, the mouth, the lungs, the stomach, the colon, the sex organs, the skin. All of those have microbes associated with them. And again, I'll say it again, 90% of diseases can be traced back to the gut and or the microbiome. And this is a very sophisticated graph where they're showing out a number of different microorganisms. And notice what they have: different bugs either promoting or blocking rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, both type 1 and 2, eczema, asthma, inflammatory and irritable bowel, cardiovascular diseases, fatty liver, chronic kidney disease, brain health, all of those. And they even have certain bugs associated with them. But notice what it says at the very top here. Gut microbial diversity reduces the probability of all these. So how do you get rid of your gut diversity? Well, you eat a very limited diet and or you take antibiotics, and those could be a problem for you. So I happen to really like this picture. And notice what this says. These studies clearly reveal that the more diverse and balanced gut microbiomes are, they're present in healthy, long-living people, whereas disturbed and not diverse microbiomes and even dysbiosis are observed in elderly that are suffering, or maybe even people that don't get to be elderly. So when we start looking at the difference between probiotics and prebiotics, probiotics are alive, prebiotics are what the probiotics eat. And so it's interesting that, I'm going to tell people that anything you eat is a prebiotic, but some of the things that turn out to be really good for good bugs, onion, soybean, asparagus, bananas, leeks. I really wish they called out bread being a whole grain, non-gluten bread, artichoke, garlic, and what foods are sources of probiotics, microorganisms. Cheese, how about chocolate? And I found this very, very fascinating. Good chocolate, whole chocolate, good for the brain, good for the gut. We'll talk about the gut-brain connection in a bit. But chocolate has both pre and probiotics. Kefir, sour cream, miso soup, pickles, probiotic milk, that means milk that has not been pasteurized, and yogurt. All of these can be good sources of bugs. So people ask the question, what kind of foods are good for the gut or bad for the gut? Here's what I'll tell you. If someone has an inflammatory food and you get inflammation in the gut, that's a problem. That can cause a leaky gut and whole body inflammatory problems. You probably have heard me say many, many times, if God made it, it's okay. If man made it, stay away. So these good, whole, natural foods are quite good. And these processed foods, packaged, that people eat way too much of, well, those are not good for the gut. When you start looking around, and you don't have to look very far, there are people that have become so talented at preparing natural, whole food meals, sometimes even raw, and they're specialists. They're specialists in raw food and vegan food and everything else. But when you look at that, the colors are very appealing. And I'll tell you what, the colors of nature, every different color has a different blend of nutrients. And that's one of my guidelines. People should strive for every color every day, and this does not count. So there was an article that looked at the diets around the world, and this one was called the Standard American Diet, also known as the Modern American Diet. So just break down the letters: Standard American Diet, SAD diet, Modern American Diet, MAD diet. People will be sad and mad if they eat like this. And, that's not how we should be eating. I do see a couple of things that are reasonable, but most of it is just plain garbage on that list. So what kind of foods love your gut? Well, guess what? Your gut might be different than my gut. In fact, not might be, it definitely is. So remember, Lucretius, a couple thousand years ago, said one man's food's another man's poison. But most of these foods ought to be pretty safe for most people. But when people have gut challenges, I often recommend one food type per meal. Eat it, digest it, see how it agrees with you. If it agrees with you, make a list of it. If it doesn't, you might want to try it again at another point in time. And, if you find out that it consistently doesn't agree with you, probably don't do it. And I thought this was a really nice graphic. It looks at these intersections of nutrient advice. So some people want to be fully plant-based, other people want to be paleo, some people want to be keto, other people want to be Mediterranean, some people want to be low fat. But what's the intersection of all these? They're whole foods. You certainly need enough quality protein. I'm a big fan of vegetables, but we will talk a little bit about the carnivore diet coming up soon, because there's some emerging evidence where that can be really powerful. Nutrient density, well, that would assume that it's a quality food grown in quality soil and not intoxicated with herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. Why eat slowly? When you eat slowly and chew your food, your digestion becomes more efficient and your satiety happens faster. And then minimal amounts of processed foods are where we want to go. When we look at this PubMed search on the gut-brain connection, 760 published citations going back over 60 years. And where have most of them come? Just in the last handful of years. So notice the first thing that came up, the gut microbiota, brain axis, and behavior. Yeah, our behavior is dependent upon the bugs in our gut, and even brain disorders. So this graphic talks about a healthy gut-brain axis, and there's plenty of details in these pictures. But a synapse is a connection between nerves, and calcium is a nerve signaling molecule. The microglia is the immune system in the brain. So all of these things, including cognition, learning, memory, mood, how you move your body, and even what you're going to choose to eat, are dependent and enhanced in a good way when there's a healthy gut-brain axis. But what about when it's not so healthy? So look at what they've called out: multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neuropsychiatric challenges, and others. And that's just gut-brain. So what about gut immune system? We'll find out there's a huge link between the gut and autoimmunity as well. And so again, just more data that we want to take really good care of our gut. So healthy gut-brain axis, well, guess what? You got a healthy gut and you got a healthy brain. How awesome is that? Disturbed gut-brain axis, gut isn't healthy, brain isn't healthy, and that can be even deadly. So this is a picture of Michaela Peterson. It's an older one, and this is Jordan Peterson's daughter. So Jordan Peterson is one of my favorite brainiacs. He wrote a book called Dr. Peterson's, or really 12 Rules for Life is what he called it. But at any rate, Michaela had horrific rheumatoid arthritis that had onset as a child, and she had many joints replaced by the time she was a teen. And you know what, her probability of a good life was really minimized by all that she was struggling through. And then ultimately, she was able to put her rheumatoid arthritis to complete and total remission, and now keep it there for years with an all-meat diet, a carnivore diet. So when we start looking at the microbiome and autoimmune disease, over 2,700 studies. Notice the earliest one only goes back 22 years, so it's fairly recent in modern science that we figured out that the bugs in our gut are related to autoimmunity. And the second one that came up in this search was actually related to rheumatic disease, rheumatoid arthritis being in that category. So when we start taking a look, someone does need to be genetically predisposed, but then when they have the wrong bugs in their gut, really fed the wrong diet, and especially if they're female. Well, what does female have to do with autoimmunity? A lot. Estrogens promote autoimmunity, androgens protect against that. And you get the wrong combination of that, and you can have severe autoimmune disease. And it's estimated that women have between 75 and 80% of autoimmunity, the difference there being the estrogens promote it, whereas with men, androgens protect against it. So I'll call out this citation: interactions of the microbiome and the immune system have been shown to promote and sustain chronic inflammation and autoimmunity. So if we can change that, can we change that circumstance? And that one's out of sequence, but I'll come back to Ganoderma and that in a moment. But Michaela Peterson did a carnivore diet, absolutely all meat. And what we know is that the animal-based diet is definitely going to change the microorganisms in the gut. And in her case, in a way which made her autoimmunity go away. So my slide that was out of sequence, Ganoderma lucidum, my favorite superfood, also known as reishi, going back the last 7 years, 48 specific studies on the gut microbiome. And I want to point out two of these. Notice it says Ganoderma lucidum reduces obesity by modulating the microbiome. And how about this one? It actually inhibits inflammation and tumorigenesis, the creation of tumors in the colon. So very, very powerful studies there. And this was a specific study about Ganoderma and what's known as the obese microbiome. So when people have the wrong balance of bugs in their gut, they can actually extract more calories from their food. And people can literally gain weight and gain fat just eating salads with the wrong microbiome. So years ago, and I still, have plenty of people that deal with obesity, but I would have people do a diet journal and an exercise journal. And I'd have people come in and they were eating a very low calorie diet, maybe 700 to 1,000 calories a day. They were doing moderate exercise, moderate intensity, 30 minutes to an hour a day. And I thought, how in the world can you gain weight on that? Well, it turns out that if they have the wrong microbiome, that could actually be a high calorie diet because the bugs in the gut are eating the fiber, converting it to fat, and people are absorbing a lot of calories. So someone asked the question, well, what if someone has heartburn? Can they drink coffee? Nearly 80% of people that have heartburn don't do well with coffee. But that's the nice thing about Ganoderma or reishi infused coffee. Ganoderma is the most alkaline food on the planet. And then when you take the alkalinity of Ganoderma, mix it with the acidity of coffee, you neutralize it or possibly even make it alkaline. And I find out that even 9 out of 10 people that have problems with acid reflux can consistently drink coffee. So that was all the questions that were submitted, but now we can go to whatever questions are remaining. And I'm happy to answer as many of those as I possibly can.
Perfect. First one's from Devon. What are some ways that we can give ourselves a checkup to take an inventory of our gut health?
Well, that's a great question. And know thyself is one of the ultimate rules. So, if your gut is not disturbed, if you don't have reflux, if you don't have diarrhea, if you don't have gas and bloating, if you don't have pain, if you have ideal body composition, then there's a pretty good chance. So you just want to listen to your body and see where you are. But you'd be surprised how many people, it doesn't seem to matter what they eat, they feel some type of disturbance in their gut. They can feel bloating, they can feel gas. When you eat something, it should pass through your body in an 18 to 22 hour cycle. So, there's people that are only having a few bowel movements a week or less than that. That's terrible. They're actually poisoning their body on a consistent basis. And everything's an experiment. It's so Ralph Waldo Emerson said, the more experiments, the better. So go down to one food per meal and find out if that food bothers you. And that's called mono meals, or that's the simple term for it. But I've had plenty of people where I put on mono meals and then they come to realize, wow, I thought that food was good for me, but when I eat it, I don't do well with it. Well, sometimes we can give digestive enzymes to help with that. Sometimes we can change the microbiome. And sometimes they just plain need to avoid that food. And now you start looking at someone like Michaela Peterson, crippling rheumatoid arthritis, and then suddenly just avoiding all plants. Well, what's pretty clear to me is that she was feeding the wrong bugs in her gut, and that triggered rheumatoid arthritis. Now, could she get back to some plants? I believe she could, and I actually believe she should, but probably one at a time, low quantities, make sure she's not overly reactive to it. But if you spend your whole life in pain and misery and doctors aren't giving you hope, and suddenly you find a little dietary change sticks, you might be pretty excited to keep that up and not so excited to change it. And that seems to be the case with her, and even her father, Jordan Peterson, because he's now on the carnivore diet as well and has been for years.
Second. Oh, here's one. What are the best foods or supplements for pre and probiotic?
So the best food is probably going to be, depends on who you are, right? If you're Michaela Peterson, you don't want to do plants because guess what she found out? The wrong plants with the wrong bugs created these profound pro-inflammatory responses. But the best foods are foods that you tolerate well, that nourish you. I always want them clean, organic when possible, hopefully grown in nutrient-rich soil, which is harder and harder to find. But if I go back to that picture, you'll see multiple colored fruits and vegetables, salmon, things like that. Those should be, in theory, good for the gut. Now we start looking at probiotics, and we talked about the fermented foods and, kimchi and yogurt and maybe things like sauerkraut, amazingly chocolate, both pre and post, pre and probiotics. But, over the last handful of months, I've got an active patient base and I've got plenty of people that have gut challenges. There's a spore probiotic that, there's a company that makes it, Microbiome Labs, and they brought me the research. They said, Bob, we actually put our money where our mouth is. We put people on this and then we do follow-ups and we do stool tests, and that spore-based probiotic seems to create the best and most lasting change in the microbiome. But could you do it exclusively with food? You could, but you got to be very, very diligent. And I do like giving probiotics, especially, one that we have a good reason to believe will be friendly to the gut and last a long time for them. And here's what I'll tell you, that's a clinical trial as well. Now, how often do I get it right with a probiotic recommendation? Often, maybe 19 out of 20 times. But is there 1 in 20 where someone has not an ideal response? Yeah, absolutely. What do? We say, okay, not the right probiotic for you now. Let's try something different. But, again, it's all a clinical trial.
Okay. Anybody else have a question?
Looks like Jeff's got one.
I was listening to a podcast today. I'm trying to get the person's name. It was on the Ed Milet show. So it was some doctor, and they were talking about when you want to set up your diet, you really should have a genetic profile done to know the best foods to eat and all that stuff. One, how hard is that to do? Is that a common thing? And can you just speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, so genetic testing has been around for a while now after they checked the Human Genome Project. And maybe 20 years ago, I was really excited about it. And I ran genetic testing on everybody that would do it. Back then, it was more expensive. It was about $1,500 to get a snapshot of everything. Now you can get something like 23andMe and look at your entire genes for a relatively low amount of money. But what wisdom says is eat like your ancestors ate. So, do you need to invest in the genetic profile, and what exactly does it tell you? I would say that the person that's interpreting the genetic profile, that you want to be very good about. So here's what I'll share with you. So I have a patient years ago that was talked into, having a genetic profile, and she had cancer at a young age. And the person that reported her genes made her feel like she was going to die this year or the following year. Your genes are terrible. You can't do this. You can't do that. I don't even know how you made it this far. I mean, that's what the bozo told her. I'd already run my own genes. And when I compared it to hers, when I talked to her, I put them side by side. I said, we're so similar, we could be brother and sister. And she looked at me, she says, wait a minute, you're really healthy. I said, well, thank you for saying that. And I'm very diligent about it. And I eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every single day. But here are the facts of my genes. My great-grandfather died at 37 of a heart attack. My grandfather died at 49 of a heart attack. My dad had quadruple bypass at age 49. When he turned 50, he was the oldest living male in the family tree. My mother's father was an insulin-dependent diabetic. Her mother had rheumatoid arthritis. My mother was diagnosed with crippling rheumatoid arthritis at age 29. By the way, went into complete remission within a few years. Multiple sclerosis at 35, was told she'd be in a wheelchair by 40. Both my parents are in their 80s. They don't take any medications except for my dad, one low dose blood pressure med. And they get up 6 days a week at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to the gym. So what's the difference? Their lifestyle choices. So there's a researcher that I like, and I'll have to figure out the name of who said it. It might have been Robert Sapolsky, actually, who's an absolute sage of wisdom. But he said, there are no bad genes, period, end of story. There's just a bad gene environment interaction. And so, you know, if your functional markers are good, if your body composition is good, if your energy is good, there's a good chance you're doing things right. So I don't order genetic tests anymore. Most recently, I had an individual, try to sell me a genetic plan. So I said, well, let's see what you got. So I ran my genetics updated, which is more genes than I had years ago. And you know what? It really didn't have any new data. So could someone take my genes and do the wrong thing and die early? Well, sure. Let's go with my great-grandfather and my grandfather and my dad, when he wasn't doing the right thing, quadruple bypass at 49. But when you do the right things, you can get, you can be around for a long, long time, healthy, fit, balanced. So, if you're curious, get it done, but have someone good read it. And what I'm a big fan of, more than what our genes are doing, is our functional markers. What are the genes doing? So, they used to think that a single gene made a single protein. And now they've completely refuted that. A single gene can make as many as 30,000 variations of a protein. 30,000 variations. So what determines what proteins they make? The environment of your body. Do you eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right? If you do, you're probably going to be okay. Now back to this eat like your ancestors. That's ancient wisdom. If your ancestors were from the rainforest, you probably want to eat like people from the rainforest. If your ancestors were Inuit Eskimos, you probably want to eat like Inuit Eskimos. If your ancestors lived in the Swiss Alps, you probably wanted a high-fat dairy and cheese and stuff like that and cream. If you were related to the Maasai in Africa, you'd probably want to live on animal blood. So there are so many different diets out there, but eat like your ancestors ate is a pretty good guideline. But most of us are a blend. We've got, some of us even have Neanderthal in them, which is so fascinating, right? So
yeah.
But
okay, so I'm hearing you say, if I just concentrate on the eat right, think right, poop right, all foods God made, okay, man made, stay away. Is there one thing I got told today from my physician what was to stay away from red meat? Is that something that is there good red meat? Or I like red meat. I do I have to stay away completely, or what?
Red meat can be absolutely phenomenal. So, that's what Michaela Peterson eats exclusively. That's what Jordan Peterson eats exclusively, and they're both raving health benefits. And I was on a private Zoom with Sean Baker, the author of The Carnivore Diet, and even Harvard is starting to look at that. And so what's more important is not that the meat's red, but what did that animal eat? So if it was a grass-fed, healthy animal, no antibiotics, no hormones, then it's probably good. But if it was commercial, I don't care what you're getting commercial, beef, chicken, farm fish, that's mostly crap, and so if we have good, clean foods from good, clean animals that have ate a good, clean diet, then we're going to be okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Does this doctor have a background in nutrition, or he was just spouting out what someone told him?
He's a pretty young guy, seemed to, didn't make me take pills and stuff, but said,
No?
listen, you're going to need to, get this down. Right. And
So
I said,
you probably wanted to lower cholesterol or something like that.
blood pressure and my cholesterol too. Yes.
So I'll give a case study. So I had an individual that was really struggling with both those issues. And he was about 50 pounds overweight, and his blood pressure was really high and not controlled by medication. 2 weeks of carnivore, meat only, red meat only. He lost like 15 pounds, but his blood pressure went from something like 190 over 120 to about 135 over 85, and his cholesterol dropped 100 points. So, that's the interesting thing. If you have a baseline on you, now your experiment starts. Maybe try 2 weeks of nothing but red meat and see what happens. That's a long time to go with it. Now, I have a young lady that had very severe autoimmunity, and 3 days into carnivore, she says, Bob, I got so much diarrhea, I can't continue. And I said, well, then it's probably too harsh for you right now. But what would cause the diarrhea? Probably the die-off of the bad bacteria in her gut that are starving to death. And it's probably a good thing, but we're not in a hurry to, where she needs to go through a month of diarrhea to adapt.
Right. Interesting.
It is.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Thanks for your question. I love your boat.
Thank you. Me too. It's a dream, of course, to rent for a week for my family.
Love it.
There you go. Only 300,000 a week to rent, everything included.
Beautiful. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to come, Jeff. Hey, Dr. Bob. I don't really have a question. It's more of a statement, and I just would appreciate some feedback or just your commentary on it. One of the things that I've noticed is for people who want to lose weight fast, or who I don't really know how to describe, but they want to lose weight and they I just need to lose my stomach. They always ask about something to like a diuretic or a laxative or something. And so it's just interesting learning about gut health. Yes, you're going to slush out some old poop, and it's probably good that you do the laxative, but what's the relation between losing weight and why do people always think they need like tummy teas or they need something to just get rid of their gut, but they're not really losing fat? I don't know. I'm kind of confused because when people ask me for like, hey, do you have something to lose my stomach? I just need something to get rid of my gut. And maybe it's ignorance, maybe they just don't understand, but I'm like, yeah, you're going to probably, poop out some old poop, but that's not going to get rid of your belly fat. Or if I'm wrong, help me understand, Dr. Bob.
Oh, I don't think you're wrong. If you poop, you get rid of poop. If you take a diuretic, you get rid of water, you pee. Now, if you diet appropriately and exercise appropriately for you, then you ought to lose some fat. But so there's a quote from, I believe it's the journal Endocrinology, and I've taught full day seminars on what's called the endocrine fat connection. So where you store your fat tells what's going on with the endocrine system. And that belly fat is stress fat. It's adrenal fat. It's cortisol fat. And by the way, it's called angry fat. And so the fat that's what's called organ fat, visceral adipose tissue, intra-abdominal fat, all that stuff is worse than the regular type of fat. But someone's been stressed for too long. And so the question, I recall getting this question 30 years ago. So this woman came in to see me and she says, you know what, I've had 5 children and I've always had this really super flat tummy, but here comes menopause and boom, I've got this stomach that I just can't get rid of. What's going on? Well, her hormone balance shifted from her ovaries. In menopause, they're not making estrogens and progestins anymore, but the adrenal glands are making the precursors to the sex steroids, estrogen, progestin. And when the adrenals are driving because you're under stress, well, then you get more belly fat. And so, you want to balance the hormones and you want to do things right for the diet. There's a shortcut which seldom works, or there could be what we would call a smart cut. And the shortcut might be, I want the scale to weigh less, so I'm going to take a diuretic and a laxative. Well, okay, what'd you do? You lost poop and pee. Is that what you want to do? Or do you want to do a stress reset, melatonin, theanine, Ganoderma spores every waking hour, take the edge off of stress, maybe do some type of diet change where you change the microbiome and start moving your body? What kind of fat loss will you have then? Probably something that's sustainable and in the long run, much better for you. So, whenever I give an official report of findings with patients, I always tell them, you want to know the answers to 4 questions. What's causing the problem? And it's not that you haven't had enough laxative or diuretic. It's probably that you're stressed and not making the best dietary and lifestyle choices. Second question they want to know is that, can I help? My answer is always the same. I don't know, but I'll try. How long does it take to make a difference? Bodies respond to frequency, duration, intensity, quality, and timing of stimuli. How much does it cost? Well, that depends on what we do. But my 5 other questions: how complicated is the case? How strong and resilient is the patient? Is there anything in the chemistry we need to address? Is there an unresolved trauma or infection, or is there anything else? And when we answer those questions, we can usually put together a good protocol that, if people are willing to put in the effort, they can make fast changes. Now, if they're not going to.
A follow-up from Mary. So if your ancestors are from Norway, you can assume that fish and other Scandinavian foods may be good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's so interesting there, it's so fascinating that there's a section of Sweden that somehow was like landlocked, and they could tell, it was one of the more controlled studies on diet and especially famine. And they found some pretty fascinating things about epigenetics, or above the genes, related to environment and starvation and longevity. It's fascinating, but I like the Scandinavian countries, and yeah, really good fish and cold weather vegetables are what they're going to eat up there. Well, then we may just wrap it up on this epic, beautiful, amazing, wonderful evening. Good night, all. Thank you for your questions and participation, and God bless.